Romanesque architects always faced the problem of bringing in light. Gothic architects in France solved this problem. Gothic architecture is really easy to identify. It's all about height and light. Because Gothic architects developed pointed arches rather than rounded ones, they were able to fix the light problem. They also used flying buttresses, architectural elements outside of the church, which help hold up the walls. Because of this, they could have stained glass windows and let the light in. They could also have thinner walls and more slender columns because of these exterior supports, these flying buttresses. Because they could now do stained glass windows, Gothic churches really were full of this filtered, colored light. It created a sense of a heavenly realm when you entered the church. Gothic churches, like Romanesque churches, were still large and they still needed to accommodate the pilgrim craze. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris took about a century to build. It's a really good example of the architectural element, flying buttresses. That's so typical of the Gothic. Look at the exterior photograph. In the back of the church, you can see partial arches supporting the nave walls. So again, because these exterior supports were there was more height and light that could be allowed in the church. Thinner walls, more windows. In this interior image, you can see Notre Dame's famous rose window. These rose windows are large, circular, stained glass windows, usually at the entrance and exit of churches, and they're very typical of Gothic architecture. They would depict biblical scenes and figures in a circular configuration. This way, when you enter or leave the church, you really sense a change of location, because on the exterior, you don't get this beautiful colored light, but once you enter, you do. So it creates a real division between the sacred holy place of the church and then the rest of the world outside of the church. The Gothic style of architecture is said to have begun with the construction of this church, Saint Denis, built near Paris, begun in 1140. Look at the ceiling. You can see the slightly pointed arches rather than the rounded arches of the Romanesque style. And you can also see what's called ribbed vaulting. See those rib-like architectural elements on the ceiling? Ribbed vaulting is an architectural feature. With ribbed vaulting, you can cover a large interior space because the weight of the ceiling, still stone, bears down on the vault, and that vault is divided into webs by this framework of diagonal arched ribs. So the intersecting ribs support the vaulted stone ceiling. So all the weight from the ceiling is distributed across those ribs. Saint Denis was the first place that put such a great importance on stained glass windows and light as a metaphor for the divine and entering the divine. Gothic sculpture, like Romanesque sculpture, was largely devoted to architectural elements on the exterior of the church. Some of the most advanced Gothic sculptures were found on the jambs of churches. So jambs are just the side posts of doorways in Gothic churches. On the left, you can see jamb figures from Chartres Cathedral from about 1140. So these would have been biblical figures. They're really rigid and their backs are attached to the church. Their drapery is really stylized. Their bodies are not naturalistic. They're really elongated. But look at the jamb figures from 1210 in Rheims Cathedral in France. They are much, much more naturalistic. What a huge change from the Chartres Cathedral jamb figures. Now, the figures are almost coming off of the church. They are almost fully in the round. On the left is the angel Gabriel. You can see his wings to identify him. And then there's also the Virgin Mary and Saint Elizabeth. There's a freedom of movement here. They gesture to each other. Their drapery folds and hangs a lot more naturalistically. And they're more individualized too. So we can really see as the Gothic period goes on, sculpture gets more naturalistic.